wins. So this is the third in the series. So today's talk is delivered by Dr. Anirban Chakrabarti from IISc Bangalore. And we had talks on deep learning as well as machine learning and artificial intelligence in general. Next page, please. Next slide, please. So, as part of the Computer Society Bangalore chapter, we've been hosting a lot of webinars since April and May on niche topics of computer science, be it artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, cognitive modeling, and so on. So the speakers are very eminent, drawn from both industry and academia, as you can see here. Go to the next page, please. So today's webinar will be delivered by Dr. Anirban Chakrabarti, and the topic is zero-shot knowledge distillation in deep nets. Anirban is currently an assistant professor at IISc, and he obtained his PhD from University of California, Riverside in 2014. And he held research positions in NTU and NUS, Singapore before that. And he was also part of the Robert Bosch Research Center before joining IISc in 2017. And his research areas include machine learning, artificial intelligence, and deep nets. And he will be talking about the zero-shot knowledge distillation in deep nets today. Next slide, please. So before we go to the talk by Dr. Anirban, so let me give a brief introduction about ourselves. IEEE Computer Society Bangalore chapter, and we've been recognized both locally as well as internationally for our volunteer efforts. So I'd like to bring this to the participants that there are a lot of opportunities to take part in Computer Society, both as a member and a volunteer, and also a lot of leadership positions available if you're interested. Go to the next slide, please. So I'd like to invite you to follow us, be it LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. And also you can reach us through this email ID. And also for all the events that we host, please log on to our website. And we look forward to hosting you again and also update you with a lot of our events and other activities. So without much ado, I would like to hand over the virtual stage to Dr. Anirban for his talk. And before that, a few issues that Anand will explain. So thank you very much, and we hope you will enjoy this webinar.
Thanks a lot, Vishwas. Participants, you are muted on entry and kindly stay muted and try to keep your videos off so that it won't create a distraction to the other participants and the speaker. Also try to put the questions in the chat window and the speaker will be answering those questions towards the end in the Q&A session. Over to you, Dr. Anirban. You're the presenter now. Hello. Are you on mute? Hello.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just shared it before unmuting myself. So
Sure,
yeah.
sure,
Many thanks, Vishwas and Anand from IEEE Computer Society for inviting me to give a talk in this webinar with its AppCare. So I'm really privileged, and as Vishwas mentioned, I'll be speaking on a couple of topics that we had, explored in the recent past, mainly in 2019 and early 2020. And and also one more thing. So due to my bandwidth issues, I hope it will be okay if I turn off my video for the duration of the talk at least. And sorry for that, but it's just that my network may not be most optimum right when I share. So I'll stop my video and share my screen now. So is my screen visible?
Yes, yes,
So,
it is.
okay. Okay. Again, good afternoon. So as mentioned, so my talk will be about knowledge distillation in deep networks, and we specifically explore, an area of research which is very recent, and since we have introduced last year, it has gained some traction in the community, but it's still in a very nascent stage. So it's called zero shot or data-free knowledge distillation in deep networks. So this whole area of data-free or few shot or zero shot computer vision or machine learning has become very popular over the past few years, and this is just one area that was kind of underexplored. This area of knowledge distillation. So this might give you some basic introduction and basic and initial insights into the problem itself. So before getting into the problem at hand, we will start by motivating the problem. Why do we even want to look into this zero shot problem? So and the context of knowledge distillation. So as you all know, that deep models or modern day machine learning models, they are large in size and they thrive on data availability of training data, right? So that's why we call deep models are data hungry. And with the advent of the ubiquitous computing, world wide web, the social networks, we have a bounty of data being generated every minute, right? And be it in text form, be it in image form, in any other unstructured form, and so on and so forth. So the traditional machine learning approaches or traditional computer vision approaches haven't been able to leverage this plethora of the high quality available training data mainly because of their the limited bandwidth, limited model capacity. However, with the advent of deep learning since 2011, we have been seeing a continuous increase in the capacity of the networks. The hardwares are also getting improved. That is allowing us to train these large networks in finite time. And that's where the academia and especially the corporates, the big corporates especially, has been able to leverage the availability and the capability of this machine learning tools to train on larger and larger data sets. And that's why they also invested a lot of time and effort to acquire or collect data sets which are of gigantic sizes. And we know some of them, in fact. And that's where these companies have edged over their competitions. And we can say that it's not only their technological prowess, but it's also availability of very large scale proprietary niche data sets that are available with them have allowed them to build machine learning solutions that are the state of the arts nowadays, and even rivaling human performance for some of these applications, right? So there are many such data sets that we can talk about. We all know about this DeepFace from Facebook, which has been the state of the art face recognition system for quite a long time, and it has reached an accuracy level of very high accuracy level, close to 100%, which is rivaling human and even possibly beating human performance as well. There are other data sets such as these GFT 300 million. So this is another data set which has been proprietary, and there has been a lot of request, I guess, to Google to possibly release the data set, or if possible release models trained on the weights of models trained on these data sets and so on. So the data is precious to these companies, and this allows them to build models which are state of the art, but it also, it also takes some investment from their side as well. So most companies have proprietary rights over many that they are not, ready to share immediately. Also, other practical constraints. For example, there could be biometric data that we are talking about, faces here, or we might be talking about, fingerprints or other biometric, or maybe eye scans and things like that. So we might be talking about biometric data, or maybe even, biomedical image analysis. We are talking about, medical data, or even medical records on which we can build our models. Although people often anonymize these data sets, still, I mean, there could be a lot of practical constraints and sensitivity revolving around these data sets that would not allow, the source organization to share the data with the common public, right? So most often they will share among their, collaborators and all, but may not be for the common public. And this brings us, to this whole gamut of problems, which we can kind of, very roughly call a data efficient deep learning, which where we want to, reduce our reliance on the availability of, annotated training data sets that, that was used to build these models and so on. So clearly there is a need of data efficient deep learning algorithms, and especially we'll be talking about computer vision for the rest of my slides, as I am, a vision person. So with that in perspective, let's move on to the topic of interest for this particular talk, which is zero-shot knowledge distillation in deep nets. So before we move into what is zero-shot in the knowledge distillation problem, we will first introduce the knowledge distillation problem for those of you who might be unfamiliar with the problem. And then we will go on and motivate why the knowledge distillation problem. And it's the same motivation that we have been described before, the proprietary nature of the data sets that we cannot share. So what is knowledge distillation? What is knowledge distillation? So think about a situation where you are interested, in deploying a model on, a low compute or a low resource device, let's say. Okay, so which does not have a, a lot of, high memory GPU or something like that, right? So so there you possibly cannot deploy very large networks as otherwise, design and build to get the state of the art performances, right? So so for those you need a shallower network, but the problem with the shallow network is that the capacity is less, right? So if you have, a data set available which is of, very large size, as some of the ones that I have mentioned, let's say ImageNet or other bigger data, this model, which is, a smaller dimensional, a smaller capacity model, may not be fully able to leverage the diversity and the size present in this particular data set. So here X is, let's say, the input, the image to the models that we want to, that we want to run inference with, and Y is the output. Let's say for an image classification problem or image recognition problem, Y is, a label like cat, dog, aeroplane, truck, car, and X is the image itself, right? So that in mind, so given that we have to, design, we have to train a smaller capacity model, we cannot possibly be able to leverage the available very high dimensional data set. Now consider this case. Now let's say somehow you have trained a much larger model, right? Much larger model that will leveraging the true, true quality and size of the data set given here. And let us call that T, or a teacher model, right? So let us call that a teacher model. Now, this small model, this smaller model, it's not a small, it's a smaller model. Let us call that a student model. Now we'll come to why we call that teacher and student very soon. So now the traditional way of training this model given this data set would be, let's say it's a classification task. So for the rest of the slides, we'll constrain our to classification, because knowledge distillation predominantly talks about classifications, although there are other other type of machine learning tasks for knowledge distillation recently. So the way we train this particular network is using some sort of a cross entropy loss, right? So we have we forward pass the training data to this model. We generate the predicted soft output, and then we compare that with the ground truth target. That is y. That's the true level, ground truth level, and we compute a loss. We back propagate the gradient of the loss through this particular model, and then we update the learn the weights of this particular network. Now, in addition to that, Hinton et al., so Geoff Hinton et al., in their seminal papers in 2015, distilling the knowledge in a neural network, which was the first modern paper in the knowledge distillation. It's not the first paper, it's the first modern deep learning knowledge distillation paper, where they had shown that it's not only the cross entropy loss that tries to it tries to minimize the entropy of the prediction, but at the same time they said that it is not only the true level or the probability with which you predict the true level that matters. It also matters the probability that are present in the or by which you are predicting the non-true or non-ground truth classes as well. So they give an example. For example, the true level is a BMW, let's say. It's exactly what the example that they give. Let's say the true level is BMW. Now, with a high probability, let's say you have trained your model to predict that this particular image is of a BMW. Now, there are other classes present in the dataset as well. One of those classes is a pickup truck, right? So there is a possibility that pickup truck will be predicted with a much lower probability, but still that probability will be higher than the probability that you predict a carrot, right? So a BMW should be more closer to a pickup truck than a carrot in the probability space, right? So that is exactly where what we call a soft soft target that we want our student to learn. So now that we have trained a very large teacher model and we assume that it generalizes very well to new data, the knowledge that is there in this particular teacher model can on to the student in addition to the cross entropy loss via this particular soft target, which is nothing but the probability distribution across all the classes that the teacher predicts for a certain input image, and we would want the student to predict in the same way, right? So in addition to the cross entropy loss, that's the traditional way of training a student network, we would also want to minimize the distance between the soft levels predicted by soft levels can be the logits or that is the pre-softmax or the softmax probability distribution. So we'll try to minimize the distance in distribution between the soft levels produced by the student and the teacher for any given input data, as well as we would like to minimize the cross entropy loss that we traditionally use to train a classifier, right? So this is the core of the knowledge distribution. So knowledge distillation. So the Hinton et al. Say that the probability with which you predict the incorrect classes contain something. I mean, they term it as dark knowledge that get passed from the teacher to student, which helps the student to gain better generalizability similar to that of a teacher and thereby improve its performance beyond simply training it with a cross entropy loss. Okay. So now that is more like a primer in knowledge distillation for classification. So now, as you can see that for doing the whole thing, so here if you look at this particular loss function, you need both x and y, right? So that is, you need access to the data set, to a transfer set, and traditionally it has been the data set on which this particular teacher model is trained. The original bigger network is trained. Now, as we had motivated in the previous slides, that this assumption may not always be a valid assumption. So oftentimes the corporates or the sources which has access to the bigger data sets, which they can use that data set to train a big model, they are ready to ship those models to all of us or to the public via GitHub or something, but they may not give us access to the original training data, right? So thereby we arrive at a problem which which is that can we do knowledge distillation without having access to the training data on which the teacher was originally trained on. Now immediately you can see that if I take out this original training data set, then the main problem is we don't have the distillation loss, we don't have the cross entropy loss because we don't have X and Y. Right? What do we have access to is essentially the teacher model here, which we had trained utilizing the data set that we do not have access to. So maybe that begs the question that is there any memory that is inside that particular teacher network which it has been trained with the original data set. So and the weights are possibly with some reflection of those original training data. So is it possible to actually take the weights of this teacher model and and is it possible to kind of generate some impressions of the original training data that we can synthesize from this teacher model? Because if we can do that, potentially use that to do the knowledge distillation. That is our target, right? So this brings us to the domain of synthesis, right? Data synthesis. So the pseudo data synthesis task is not the approaches is not very new. First of all, I mean, people have explored it via various means. I mean, one popular way is essentially through some variant of activation maximization, and the other variants are using GANs, for example. We'll come to both of these. The first one, I mean, it's a very popular one, was proposed, albeit for a very different application, which is essentially adversarial attack. So or adversarial perturbation. It's a data-free adversarial universal perturbation generation paper that was presented in ECCV 2018. So there, what the authors did is that they said that, okay, I have a pre-trained model. Now I want to generate some impressions of the class dog, let's say. So what they do is that they take the pre-softmax. So they essentially they try to maximize the logits of the pre-softmax to the class dog, and they want to generate an input that maximizes that particular pre-softmax, right? So in a way, you can think about how do you do it. So your this teacher, this model, for example, is fixed, right? It's frozen. So you start with some random initialization, you make a forward pass, you see what's the pre-softmax value, or what's the softmax value, let's say, and you try to increase that, and you define a loss based on that. You try to back propagate, and essentially instead of updating the weights of this the model, you update the input itself, right? So that is how you do some sort of an activation maximization for the pre-softmax here corresponding to any given target class, and you end up generating some sort of an impression or image corresponding to that target class as given by this particular pre-trained network. So they call this generated images as class impressions, because they are not really the original data, because you can see for the dog, it's possibly some sort of a very furry dog, but there are lots of such examples, and there are a lot of backgrounds which seems a very it looks like a hallucinated background, so on and so forth, right? So it's not the true image at all, but it has some similarity in the visual sense with the true image, and hence they call it impressions for that particular class. And here are some examples, some visual examples for other from that particular work for other classes, such as fish, some monkeys, cocks, and etc. So the visual quality of such class impressions are very good, and you can understand why, because they are trying to maximize the pre-softmax for a specific class, and to achieve this particular goal. This might give data with good visual quality to some extent, but it has some strong limitations, especially when we consider a task such as knowledge distillation at hand. So the first main problem is that generated samples are has very little diversity. So what do I mean with diversity is that if you once you generate this So all these samples, for example, the mechanism that you use to generate these samples is essentially via activation maximization, right? So when you take this image and make a forward pass through this particular pre-trained teacher model, it will generate a very high softmax, very high value of softmax, right? So in the label space, you will not see at all, when you use this generated images, right? So that is one major problem, because now it is as if we are generating very less number of samples, and the transfer set or the training set that we are trying to generate will be, relatively, in all, for all practical reasons, will be very highly correlated, right? So hence this will cause the diversity issue while training our student model. Another here, I mean, we have not considered the relative probabilities of the incorrect classes. So we only wanted to maximize, the activations corresponding, or the probabilities corresponding to the true or ground truth classes, right? While generating an impression for that particular class, and hence, first of all, there would be less diversity. Secondly, these values will be rather very small, and so on and so forth, and there is no, explicit way that we have actually modeled these relative probabilities of incorrect classes. So we may expect the student may not well when trained on this particular, using this AIs for these two reasons especially. So that as to our proposed, framework for doing data free or zero shot knowledge distillation via generating synthetic data samples from the pre-trained teacher model, right? So what we do, we start by sampling a softmax first. So I don't know whether my pointer is visible, but see this vector, and I mean this softmax vector that we color code here, which has probably a slightly higher value, maybe 0.6 or zero point 0.7 for the class car, and maybe for a slightly lower value for truck, and the lower values for all other classes, and so on, right? So if we can sample, a target first, right, then we can always, back propagate, or we can always use that target and propagate that through the pre-trained teacher model, and to generate a sample data, sample impression, image impression, right? We now the point is here, as you can see, we are not considering a maximization for a certain class. It's not a class specific softmax vector that we are trying to sample here. It could be any possible valid softmax vector, right, that we are trying to sample. So the only thing is that the probability should add up to 1. Now there are certain other constraints that will come to. Now one way of sampling the softmax vectors, right, is essentially to sample from something called a Dirichlet distribution, right? Because this softmax vector itself is a distribution over the labels, so we are essentially sampling from a distribution of distributions. So we are sampling from a Dirichlet. This Dirichlet, this first parameter is the total number of classes. So that is the dimension of the softmax that we are trying to generate. Now that is available because we have the teacher model, right? So we know the last dimension of the last layer, the softmax layer. So we know the value of k, which is the total number of classes in the original training data set. Now there are certain other parameters in a Dirichlet. So one important parameter is the concentration parameter that we call as the alpha k, for example, for a certain class k. So now this concentration parameters tries to model where from in the Dirichlet simplex you are sampling your softmax here, for example. Now we model this particular alpha in a very interesting way. So what we say is the following. So although we any softmax from a valid Dirichlet, the problem that we'll have is that we may sample a softmax where the car will have, let's say, 0.6 probability, and then maybe horse will have 0.4 probabilities, and rest are very, very small at 0.0001 and so on. Right. So that is possibly a less feasible kind of a softmax than, let's say, a car with, let's say, 0.6 probabilities, truck with 0.3 probabilities, and then maybe pickup truck with 0.05 probabilities, and then maybe carrot with, let's say, a very small probability, and horse, right? So essentially what I mean to say here, that there is some inherent, similarities between these classes, right? There are certain semantic similarities between the classes. They are not semantic, and hence an ideal target that we want to sample first should at least try to model that kind of a semantic similarity that is inherent in that particular data set. Now, you may say that we don't know anything about this data set. First of all, we don't even know what is car, what is cat, because I don't even know the names of these labels. So we cannot go to, a WordNet or something like that. I cannot find out which label should be simple, right? And at the same time, I have no other information available from the data set as well. There is no metadata that is also given to us. So that is exactly where we take an indirect or an implicit approach. So we already have, the weights of the, pre-softmax. So the weights of the, the softmax nodes that to the last fully connected, layer. So those weights, if you call them wi for a certain final node I, so which corresponds to the, let's say, the class I. So then some sort of a normalized inner product between these weights would essentially give us a value of class similarity, some indirect measure of class similarity. Why? Hypothesize that, I mean, when we train a network, in the last layer, these will be correlated to each other if these classes are also correlated to each other, right? So we'll get into that we'll explain that. And let's say once we have, let's say, with that we model, some sort of a class similarity matrix, and each row of the class similarity matrix we can take a concentration parameter, and then with that, parameterizing the Dirichlet, we can sample a softmax, and this softmax is essentially our target. Now the goal is that, keeping the teacher model frozen, I want to generate an input image that generates, when forward passed to this teacher model, yields this particular target softmax that I just sampled, right? So again, so to understand, so now I have just sampled the target. So this is the target vector that I want, and I want the corresponding input image that generates this particular target vector that I have sampled. Now, essentially, what that means is that, can I generate an image, input image, which we call data impression, because it's not tied to any particular class that strongly. So can I generate a data impression, an image, such that when I take that image and forward pass to this frozen teacher network, it gives almost exactly the softmax that we had just sampled, that matches the target softmax. So essentially, in a mathematical way, that is, we want to find out an x. So this is the x that we are after. This theta t and tau, these are, tau is the temperature parameter in the softmax, and theta t is essentially all the parameters or the weights of the teacher model, let's say. So when I forward pass, I want to find this x, such that when I forward pass this x to the t, that gives me the softmax t, t of x, and that should match the sampled yik that I just sampled from this particular Dirichlet. So I would minimize some sort of a cross entropy between these two, some sort of a loss in these two vectors, and and when I minimize that particular loss with respect to this input image, again, to remember that it's not with respect to the weights of the model that we traditionally do while training a network, we will get, the input data impression, right? So essentially, one other point that I want to highlight here. So in let's say a 2D Dirichlet simplex, where do we want to sample our softmaxes from? Let's say it's a three class case. Let's say in this particular. So we would possibly want to sample from, we would not want to sample from the uniformly from the Dirichlet or the middle portion of the Dirichlet simplex, because clearly that would give some sort of a uniform probability for all these classes, right? Which is meaningless, because we still need to predict, have target prediction, which is highly likely to be a car or a dog, right? So it cannot be like 0.5 car and 0.5 carrot, right? It's meaningless. But at the same time, I do not want to go to the exact corners of the simplex, which will exactly correspond to the class operations, right? Or essentially going to this means essentially we are trying to generate, a one hot encoded representation as our target, right? So the probability of card will be as high as, let's say, 1, and the remaining probabilities will be 0. So that also I do not want, because we have just seen that there are certain problems associated with generating or that kind of an activation maximization type of approach, because the variability in the generated data and the information content in the non gold standard or non gold standard classes are also negligible, because they are all very, very small. So hence we would like to sample from somewhere closer to this corners of the simplex, but not exactly at the top of the corner, like something like this 0.8 as the topmost probability, and so on. So to again reiterate some of the things that I had just mentioned. So for the Dirichlet, the concentration parameter can be thought of determining, how much concentrated, the mass of the sample from a Dirichlet distribution is likely to be to one of the classes. The concentration parameters, are assigned in order to reflect the similarities across the components in the softmax vector. So that's exactly what we were describing as the class similarities, right? Or the semantic similarities or visual similarities among them. So we described that we essentially utilize the weights connecting the final and the pre-final layers of the teacher network, and do some sort and compute some sort of a normalized inner product to find out the class similarity matrix, where each row essentially denotes each row essentially particular class similarity matrix can be treated as the concentration parameter for the particular class K, right? So now the other thing that I did not mention, and which is related to the sampling from the Dirichlet simplex. So as I mentioned, the range of values within the concentration parameter plays a significant role in controlling the density of the distribution. So and when alpha, each of these values are at the less than 1, the density congregates at the edges or towards the corner of the simplex that I just had just shown. Whereas when alpha is greater than 1, the density comes closer to the towards the center of the simplex, thereby giving a more uniform kind of sampled value. So hence we use some sort of a scaling factor which can control the range of the individual elements of the concentration parameter. So we do not want them to be exactly 1, sorry, we do not want them to be very small, and we do not want them to be such that they generate softmaxes with exactly 1 for a certain class, and so on and so forth, right? So we want to be closer to the corner of the Dirichlet simplex, but not exactly corner, so that we control by modeling the spread of the Dirichlet distribution using a scaling that we introduce in modeling the Dirichlet, which we denote that as beta, and essentially we fix the beta via some hyperparameter tuning, and fix the beta, and essentially for this particular work we take a mixture of these values of beta, and essentially we estimate the concentration parameter as product of the scaling factor beta and the row of the class similarity matrix that we had just estimated here, where each element is less than 1, right? So that's the alpha in this particular case. And then once we have the parameter, we have everything to model the Dirichlet, and then we can sample the target softmaxes. So Anand, one question. So should we take questions now, because somebody has raised an hand?
Yeah, we are fine with anything.
Yeah, sure. I can take a question now as well.
Yeah. So do we have a question? I can see a raised hand as well. Okay. Can I just confirm it was by mistake, or you wanted to ask a question? You can use the chat window if you want, or you can unmute yourself. Okay, I'm not hearing from him, so I guess it
Okay,
was
so
by
then we can
mistake.
go ahead.
Yep.
Maybe the and the audience can ask questions as and when I progress as well.
Sure.
Yeah. So so now essentially synthesized some data impressions that particular way. Now that can enable us to do the knowledge distillation, perform the knowledge distillation. So as you can see, I don't know how much visible these images are because these are very small, maybe 32 cross 32. So the last one is possibly a horse. The middle one is a bird. I think maybe you can see some sort of a beak. This is a car. This is a some sort of a deer, and so on. So although I mean we are not, I mean these are not as good looking as the class impressions, but we do not really care too much about the visual quality of these data impressions as long as they can generate the target softmaxes that we want them to generate, and with that we can essentially by taking this as my my surrogate of my original training data, this data impression set of data impressions, you can easily compute a distillation loss by forward passing each of these data impressions to both the teacher and the student. Now, one thing to note that is we do not prefer to compute the cross entropy, that is traditional, 0 1 loss or traditional, traditional classification loss, because these data impressions, as I mentioned before, these data impressions that we have generated do not necessarily correspond to exactly one class, right? Because I mean, it might so happen that the maximum probability value in this particular target softmax vector as generated by the teacher maybe it's maybe zero 0.7, right, or zero 0.6. So it does not necessarily mean that it is specific to a particular class and so on and so forth, and hence we do not want to hard threshold that probability and generate some sort of a hard hard level for that particular image, because that hard level does not probably mean anything, right? So hence we avoid the cross entropy loss. We simply rely on the distillation loss which you might take as a maybe a KL divergence between the softmaxes, or maybe some sort of some other losses between these pre-softmaxes as well, between the teacher and the student. Right. So we use that, and that's how we essentially, so we compute this loss, and we essentially we keep the teacher frozen, but we back back propagate the gradient of the loss through this particular student and update the weights of the student. Right. So this is essentially all in all the data free knowledge distillation framework. Once we have the data impression, we just minimize we find out the student parameters by minimizing the distillation loss between the teacher and the which is the soft targets between the teacher and the student, right, using the data impressions that we have generated. So these X bars are the data impressions. So I will not go through this algorithm because that is exactly what we had just described throughout the presentation. It essentially talks about how what's the different algorithmically what's the different steps. Well, one thing that you can note from this just just a quick snapshot from this particular algorithm is that it's an iter. There are lots of for loops, as you can see, and and you generate images in batches, right? So even for generating a batch, you can understand that you have to do several rounds of back propagation, right, through the teacher model. So that might be considered a drawback of this particular, a limitation of this particular method when it comes to complexity and so on, and we'll discuss this problem towards the later part of this particular presentation, right? So now, to come to the results for this part of the work, we have we have taken some data sets, MNIST, Fashion MNIST, and CIFAR 10. These are small data sets mostly. So MNIST is the data set with 10 classes, so all handed to 9, right? FMNITS is it's a grayscale data set, where the images, there are again 10 classes, but the images are of some fashion items and like shoes and like tops like that. It's a grayscale data set again, and CIFAR 10 some natural images, for some natural objects. These are like RGB images, 10 classes again, and car, truck, and things like that, right? So and as you can, if you may consider this, this order is essentially in the increasing order of complexity of the data set, right? So that we can possibly say. Now, one thing, the first experiment we did is essentially we tried to compare between the original training data, which is shown using this red line, and the data impressions. So these plots that we had done, the y-axis is the accuracy obtained by the student after the knowledge distillation is done. So in one case, in the red case, the knowledge distillation is done with the original training data. In the blue case, the knowledge distillation is done with the generated samples without any using any of the samples of the original training data, right? And this percentages, the x-axis are essentially the amount of data that we had taken. So 1% is essentially the percent, the number of images that we had taken to train as a transfer set to train the student model. So as you can see, although there is a small gap, for example, the is a relatively much simpler data set, so the gap is not that high, and that also kind of closes as we kind of use more. We increase the size of our transfer set, like we use more DIs, we generate more data impressions, and we kind of come very close to the MNIST performance that we'll see later on. For fashion MNIST also, the gap is slightly larger because the complexity is higher. For CIFAR 10, I mean, the first point might be taken, it's more like a noise, because with 1% data, it's more like 500 samples, and that means about 50 images per class. Is it? Yeah. So with that, I mean, we don't really train, and because of the complexity of the data set, none of the models get trained. Whether you use data impressions, or whether you use the original training data. However, with slightly more amount of data, when we start feeding, we see that there is a consistent gap between the performance of the original training data and the data impressions. However, this gap is not substantially large, to kind of and that is kind of encouraging. So we'll come to the final results in the next slide. But before that, we wanted to compare between the class impressions and data impressions. So we said that, okay, class impressions give visually pleasing results, but they may not always mean the best data set for using in this particular task, because they may not have enough diversity, and did not consider the non-ground truth class probabilities. And that is reflecting in this result as well. So the red ones are using our data impressions, the blue ones are class impressions, the y-axis is the accuracy of the trained student model after knowledge distillation, and again the x-axis is the percentage of data. I see a raised hand. Oh, okay. So I guess there is no question, so I'll just continue. So and the same result persists across all these different data sets. So in the final comparison, as you can see that the teacher model, the accuracy with the original training data set is 99.34% in the on the MNIST. The student, when I take all the training data, and that gives us 98.92. When we do a knowledge distillation in the traditional vanilla form, that gives us slightly higher performance in the 99s. And these two methods, this Kimura et al. 2018 and Lopez et al. 2017, they either use some amount of original data, so that essentially falls in the few shot category. So 200 original data per class, and Lopez et al. Uses some metadata, which is nothing but some sort of stored gradients when you had passed the original training data, what were original gradients, right? So that those things they had stored from the training of the teacher model, and that they used. So essentially, they use a lot of metadata corresponding to the original training data, and we are outperforming all of them on the MNIST. On the fashion MNIST, for example. Well, we can I don't know whether I can we can see this side. So in the fashion, I don't know how to kind of uh, minimize this part. Uh, so Yeah. So now, as you can see that on fashion MNIST, the performance drops with ZSKD, because the after traditional knowledge distillation gives around 89%, we get around 79%. But in that also we kind of beat the method that uses some original training data by quite some amount of margin. Note that we do not use any training data at all. And the same kind of results are reflected in the CIFAR-10, which is possibly the more challenging data sets across all three. And the gap increases with the knowledge distillation, but still we are about 70%, where the traditional knowledge distillation with all the training data available gives us about 80%. So we are within 10% of the performance with where all the training data is used. So in summary of this part, essentially we have proposed for the first time in the literature a data-free or zero-shot knowledge distillation approach. We showed that given only a pre-trained neural network teacher model, one can generate a synthetic data set which we call data impressions, and can very approximate the original training data set without any prior knowledge about the training data distribution apart from the model, right? And as far as the data knowledge distillation task is concerned, now the effectiveness of data impressions is demonstrated via experiments by training a student network from scratch for knowledge distillation, and you can see more details in our paper, and the code is also available. So now that brings us to the final part of our presentation. So and how much time do I have?
Feel free to take as much you want. Like.
Okay, sure, sure.
No issues.
Thanks. So, so this is where we will talk about a similar kind of problem, which is again we can call it as distillation, but we will take a generative approach, right? And we will show why, and there are certain other aspects to it. So, so as you have already we have already discussed in the traditional learning, all the training data is available for knowledge distillation and so on and so forth. But and it gives best accuracy. But the downside is that, I mean, we'll be in deep trouble, when the data set is not available due to privacy restrictions, or people did not want to store all the data that they actually use to train their models and so on and so forth, right? So that brings us to the other side of this problem, which we just discussed in the previous few slides, which we call a zero-shot learning domain, which does not assume any availability of any data of original training data. Now it's a very constrained setting, right? So the concern with such an approach is that these operate in a severely constrained setting, and they assume non-availability of any additional data, which is not true. We'll come to that. Also, these methods are, as we had described, these are often variants of activation maximization, or the ZSKD style approaches that we had just presented, which are very computationally expensive. That was one of our takeaways from the previous method, right? And several iterations of backpropagations are required to generate one batch of representative samples, right? So these limitations actually bring us to kind of a middle ground between these two, which is a limited data learning, or a few shot few shot learning. So it's definitely better than data free approaches as long as the accuracies are concerned, but they can also be computationally expensive, because they require some sort of a careful selection of exemplars, right? So which may not be permitted in a privacy restricted setting, right? And it can be also computationally expensive, this whole cherry picking process, right? So that is exactly where our this particular proposed work that we are trying to I'm going to describe in the next few slides, right? So we essentially aim to bridge the gap between a completely data-free approach that over constrains the problem setting, or a few shot learning approach which assumes availability of cherry picked samples, and the traditional learning approach that assumes the entire training data to be available, right? So essentially we call this model to be DGAN, or data enriching GAN, and we achieve a very competitive, or in some cases at some point of time it was the state of the art in knowledge distillation, related domain data proxy true data. So that is essentially something we would want to highlight. So what is a related domain data, and why can it be, how can it be used to kind of act as a proxy to the original training data? Note that we are not using any original training data in principle. Here also, for doing knowledge distillation, we'll be assuming availability of some other data that might be to some extent related. Maybe they are also talking about natural objects, maybe the similarity between CIFAR-10 and ImageNet, right? Or maybe MNIST and, or maybe CIFAR-10 and Fashion MNIST, and so on and so forth. Or maybe they might be completely unrelated, in which case the performance goes down, as we will show, right? But here the assumption is that how to leverage availability of any other data sets, related or unrelated, that are at our disposal, toward performing this task of knowledge distillation, without assuming that there is no data that is available at our disposal, and we will have to synthesize everything from scratch using the teacher model. So we take, as from the title, it is very clear that we take a GAN-based approach. Now, before going into other our proposed approach, we want to kind of highlight the problems associated with the traditional generative approaches in this particular domain. So a classical data free approach for generating samples using a generator and a pre-trained classifier works in this particular way. So the generator generates some samples, some sample image. Now you have a pre-trained classifier. So this could very well be the teacher model, right? So that is trained on the original training data, right? So that has seen the original training data. Now you utilize this pre-trained classifier at the output of the pre-trained as a loss function, a loss generating function, to kind of train the generator. And you say that, okay, I want my classifier to be very confidently classify a sample to be coming from one of the classes. If that happens, then I will retain that sample. Otherwise, I will ask the generator to generate other samples, and I'll train the generator in that particular way. So essentially, you try to do some sort of a entropy minimization at the output of the pre-trained classifier, right? So essentially, what you can also do is that you can say that, okay, I want to generate samples corresponding to the class 1, right? So you can set a target softmax, target target one hot vector with the first element as 1, the rest as 0, and whatever you sample for example from the generator, you pass it to the teacher model, you generate the softmax, you try to minimize the distance difference between these two, the cross entropy loss or something like that, right? The main problem with this is essentially the classical problem, in a GAN setup, that you don't have enough diversity, so that's the mode collapse, and more importantly, it can also generate a lot of noisy images that do not the data distribution, because there is no prior constraint that we are imposing, right? We are just relying on a classifier's output, and even if you sample from outside the domain, a classifier maybe give a very high probability to those outlier out of distribution samples as well. There is no guarantee that happen, and thereby we might end up generating a lot of out of distribution samples as well, right? So one possible essentially is to use some sort of a diversity enforcing network to tackle the first problem, right? That is traditionally done, and in order to bring the distribution of the generated samples closer to the true data, right? So that is what we want, and that is what we call the minimization of generation of out of distribution samples. One can impose additional statistical priors. I mean, but the problem with that is, often the statistical generating the statistical priors often involves handcrafting some constraint, right? Now this can be a very tedious process, and it also assumes that you have a lot of prior knowledge available about the original training data, right? So yeah, so that brings us to our proposed method, where essentially we try to leverage a traditional GAM framework, and we try to extend it using the pre-trained teacher model, and proposed a three-player adversarial framework. So here the three players are the generator, which generates the synthesized images. Now we can impose novel statistical prior or we, because that is challenging, we can essentially use, you know, a discriminator that is used in a, let's say, a traditional, you know, DCGAN kind of a training framework, which can be used to impose a statistical prior on the generated images. Now, the discriminator should take two inputs. So one set of inputs are coming from the images that we are generating from our generators. The other inputs will possibly come from a proxy data set. Now, that is exactly where this proxy data set comes in picture. Now, what is this proxy data set? This proxy data set could be that related or distantly related data set that we have available at our disposal in absence of the original training data. Now, what it can do, it can try to impose some sort of a statistical prior to the synthesized images, right? It can say that, okay, the images must be natural, it must have certain, you know, internal, must have certain features that is seen in this particular images, right? So the discriminator will be, I mean, will be trained to kind of, you know, project all these synthesized images to the, you know, to the manifold of, you know, this proxy data set. Right. So now the issue is that, I mean, that does not necessarily say that, okay, this, even if, you know, these images are somewhat natural, or they contain some statistical property similar to this particular proxy data set which is related to the true data set, but they not necessarily, that does not necessarily mean that these images are indeed, you know, can be assumed sampled from the original training data. So for classifier, and we impose, in addition to the adversarial losses at the end of the discriminator, we, you know, impose additional losses at the output of the pre-trained classifier which was trained on the true data set. So we try to, just like the traditional GAN based, you know, data free generation framework, we try to minimize the per sample entropy for the as an output of the classifier, and at the same time we try to enforce the diversity of the generated sample, you know, maximizing the expected entropy at the output of the classifier. So think about a batch, right? A batch of samples that you have generated. Now, for each of these samples, I want them to be very nicely classified as one of the classes. So the entropy should be minimized for each sample. But when you talk about, when you compute some sort of an expected probability for across all these images generated on this batch, so that can simply be an average of all the softmaxes that you pass through the for all these images, this particular pre-trained classifier, and that particular average softmax over the entire batch should have a high entropy, because then we will ensure that as if these images are being generated from different for different. That's why the expected softmax over the entire batch is essentially having a high expected entropy. So that is where we will enforce this diversity loss. We'll call that as maximization of expected entropy at the output of the classifier. So to ensure that the generated data is equally distributed across all classes. Now, as you can understand, so here in a traditional DCGAN kind of a training regime, you will not have, you know, these two losses, these two lambda E LG and this minus lambda D LG diversities, because these are classified specific losses that we had introduced in this three-player framework. However, these three losses are similar, and what it tries to do is that, for example, when you train the discriminator, we want to ensure that whatever the generator generates, the discriminator, you know, classify that as fake, and, you know, the proxy data set as the true one, and essentially the generator, when we try to train the generator, we try to, you know, train such that the generator generates samples that fools the discriminator, and that's why we have the corresponding to the adversarial fake loss while training this particular generator. So and at the same time, as you can see, for the discriminator, we maximize this particular term, right? And because this is written in terms of losses, in terms of entropies, and I will come to each of these terms in the next slide. So, for example, as you can see, so let's say this G corresponds to the generator, C corresponds to the classifier, right? So Y is the predicted level. So when for any generated sample, GZ, and W is essentially the expected expected output or expected softmax for a batch of such synthesized images. Now, this first term, L adversarial real, is essentially nothing but, this is trying to, for the discriminator, it is trying to, maximize. So this X is nothing but the proxy data set, by the way, right? And the Z is the latent space. So hence G of Z is the synthesized images in this particular notation. So we are trying to maximize, the probabilities with which we predict, each image of the proxy data set as real, and we try to minimize the probability with which we try to predict each generated synthetic samples to be real, right? So that is how additional discriminator in the GAN, right? Now, for training the generator, we have, three different types of losses. First of all, we try to fool the generator. Hence, we try to, minimize this particular term, right? So when we try to minimize this particular term, we are trying to say that as if the discriminator, gives a very high probability to the generated samples as well. So that's the goal of the generator, right? So we try to fool the discriminator. So that's why we try to minimize this particular term in this particular case. And in addition to that, we have this teacher model, or the pre-trained classifier as we call it. And on top of that, we define two losses, one for sample entropy, so which is given here, right? So where we try to, minimize the entropy of each sample, and we average that over the entire batch to generate that particular loss. And then there is a diversity enforcing. So diversity enforcing loss is possibly just the opposite in spirit to the energy entropy. And why is that? Because now instead of minimizing the per sample entropy, we want to, maximize the, average entropy across a batch of synthetic images, thereby ensuring that these synthetic images are generated for all different classes. They are not only coming from one particular class, and in that case, the entropy will be, very, very low. So hence there is a negative sign in front of it. And then there are the, hyperparameters that we can tune, in our training procedure. So one thing to note that if I know that my proxy data set, which is the, the third party data set, or like the publicly available, tertiary data set that we have just borrowed to train our model, if we know that that particular data set happens to be very similar to our original training data, let's say we have that knowledge, then we can give a relatively lower weight to this LG entropy loss, which tries to minimize the per sample entropy, right? Because that anyways that will happen, right? However, if they are very different, then if the data sets, the proxy data set is somewhat different from the true data set, then I mean we have to have this weight to be substantially high, so that we give a lot of importance to the classifier's output when each of these synthetic images are concerned. So now coming to the final experiments, we here considered a set of tuples, a set of pairs of data sets. So one is the true data set and one is a proxy data set that we had used to generate samples corresponding to the true data set and so on, right? So this true and proxy data set are mostly from these four data sets. So that's CIFAR 10. As I have mentioned, this is a 10 class data set with 5 samples in each class, so total 50,000 samples. Then there is this MNIST, which is nothing but this handwritten digits, which you all know. Fashion MNIST is again it's a grayscale data set with this kind of images like tops, shoes, all these kind of things like there, this fashion MNIST. And again there is this SVHN data set we also take because it has some similarity with the MNIST in some sense. It kind of shares similarity with both the CIFAR 10 and MNIST in a sense we'll just describe. So it is called Street View house number dataset. So people have taken pictures of the house numbers that are given outside each or written outside each of the houses in, let's say, the Western world, or their post boxes, and they are mostly colored images first of all. And again, these are 10 classes, and each class corresponds to one of the digits, cropped digits from this particular images. But note that these are color images, so they have some sort of a similarity with CIFAR 10 in terms of the color content, maybe, but they are very distant, in fact, because they are very different objects that we are talking. In one case, we are talking about natural objects like bird, cat, deer, dog. In other case, we are talking about natural numbers. But at least they have color information. and they are very similar to, in terms of the object content with the MNIST, all talking about digits. These are not handwritten digits. These are more, more, stencilized digits and so on and so forth, more like printed digits, but still they are somewhat similar, and the classes are very similar and so on. On top of this, we have also shown that for the first time in the literature, we showed that we can actually do this distillation going from a smaller data set like CIFAR 10 to a larger data set like a CIFAR 100, which is very similar to CIFAR 10, but it has 90 more different types of classes. So it's widely diverse. But per class data samples are, instead of 5,000, you have only 500 samples. So this is the accuracy of the student. So one thing to note that this particular method has a very good computational efficiency because it does not require any kind of those kind of iterative algorithms to generate each of these samples and so on. And it results, you can see in this particular table, a much higher accuracy than ZSKD or any other method when knowledge distillation. So as you can see, the teacher accuracy, these numbers you have, so here what we do is the true data set is CIFAR 10, and we take the 90 non-overlapping classes, so 90 other classes, setting aside the 10 CIFAR 10 target classes from CIFAR 100, and completely non classes that we take, and we say vehicle 1 and vehicle 2 we just remove, and we say that those are my proxy data set, right? So you can see that they are somewhat related, right, in a sense. So these are, although there is no class overlap between proxy data set, which is CIFAR 100's 90 selected classes, and CIFAR 10, but still they are very similar because they are, they are talking about, they are coming from the similar, visual distribution and so on and so forth, and talking about similar types of. Now that's why we can see that we can come very close, on CIFAR 10 we can come very close to the true data. ZSKD was getting around 70% if you remember correctly, but however we are getting almost within, touching distance to, the traditional noise distillation that uses all the training samples in CIFAR 10. However, in DGAN we do not use any training sample from CIFAR 10, rather we use the CIFAR 100 as a or the 90 or non-overlapping classes from CIFAR 100 as my proxy data set. Now, if you simply use the proxy data set, one can ask, like, if I simply use the proxy data set and train my model, we don't care about generation at all, right? So that also gives quite a good improvement, as you can see, because possibly because of their high amount of visual and statistical similarity with the, target data set, right? So we get around 75% with the proxy data set itself without any generation. The DC performs poorer than this. However, we kind of outperform most of them. In the second example, as you can see, this is, between FMNIST and CIFAR 10. So the target data set is FMNIST site, right, where the feature model is originally trained on. So FMNIST, if you remember, these are this kind of fashion kind of images. However, CIFAR 10 is different in a sense that they are, natural objects like, birds, dogs, automobiles. So for this experiment, we convert CIFAR 10 into grayscale as well, because FMNIST is a grayscale data set. And you can see that they are somewhat distantly related. Maybe some similarity you can say that exists is both of them are talking about some objects, right? It's not digits or anything. So with that, you can see that we are within 5% of the, knowledge performance, the student accuracy after knowledge distillation with all the training data in FMNIST. So we are within 5% when we compare 5 or 6%. This Kimura et al. Is essentially the same method that we showed earlier. It uses some 200 original data samples, and ZSKD is the previous method. We are doing, much better than ZSKD as well, around 4% more than that. The proxy dataset also gives a very respectable performance. DCGAN also gives very similar performance to ZSKD in this particular case. Whereas this particular column, the third column, is very interesting because here we take take CIFAR 10 as our proxy data set, and we go to CIFAR 100, right? So we have a model which essentially, unlike, so for example, for these experiments, we either have LeNet or AlexNet as our teacher model, and LeNet half and AlexNet half as our student models. But for this, as we are talking about a very large data set in this particular case, much larger data set in this case, so we take Inception V3 as our teacher model and ResNet 18 as our student model. And there are some overlapping classes between CIFAR 100 and CIFAR 10. But consider this as a case where the proxy dataset is a class imbalanced version of the CIFAR, where you do not have any examples from the other rest of the 90 classes except for the some of these overlapping classes, right? So of the target dataset. So it's an extremely class imbalanced version, and a very small number of examples when you compare to the original scale of the training dataset of C400, right? So that's why we see a large drop in the performance, from the teacher accuracy, about 15%, 40, 15% here. But if you see that when you use the true data, all the true data for doing knowledge distillation, you get around 70%. But here we are getting around 65%. So within again 5%, right? And we are substantially outperforming both the proxy data sets. So if we just simply use the CIFAR 10 and use that for 100-way classification or a DCGAN which performs even worse. So that is extremely promising, and that shows that our model also has a lot of scalability. Now this final slide on the results essentially talks about the how related the data set should be. So it kind of tries to explore the space of the completely unrelated data set, which can be using something like a random noise, let's say just random noise as images, right? So there is a question I can see, but I will possibly, I'm towards the very end of my presentation, maybe a couple of slides, so I will take that question towards the end if that is. So we start with we take random noise at the one extreme of my data set, and as a proxy data set, and the other extreme we have this CIFAR 190 classes, right? So the target is CIFAR 10. The true data set is CIFAR 10. So CIFAR 190 non-overlapping classes constitutes our most related. Then what we do that we remove all the classes which are even remotely or distantly related to CIFAR 10 from CIFAR 100. So categories from in CIFAR 100 which are even remotely related to CIFAR 10 classes have been excluded in this case, and we end up with samples from around 40 classes, right? 40 completely non-overlapping classes. So that is somewhat less related. Then in this particular column, as you can see, we have only 6 classes from CIFAR 100, and these 6 classes are only background classes. So the background classes are like road, cloud, forest, mountain, sea. So they do not contain any object, and hence they are very unrelated. The only thing is that they are natural in a sense, and they are they are part of the same data set, right? The other type of sample unrelated data sets that we had sampled are essentially, we took those 40 classes in this particular case, this column, and we sampled randomly 10 classes from the handpicked unrelated classes. So we randomly sampled 10 classes out of them. And then we also have SVHN. SVHN, as we have seen, another completely unrelated domain as far as CIFAR 10 is concerned, apart from the fact that it's a colored data set, colored image data set. Now, as you can see that with the CIFAR 100, CIFAR 9, CIFAR 100's 90 classes, we are performing, where performance is the best, and the performance gradually falls down as our classes become more and more unrelated. And even with 10, we can see that we kind of stay around this performance with the 40 classes. So even amongst these 40 classes, we take only 10 randomly sampled classes, we perform, close enough to this particular 80% or the 76% in this case. And even with only background classes which are very unrelated, we have around 60%. So if you go the original performance, the true data performance was around 81.78%. So we are with using only 10 randomly sampled classes, we are around 75% or 73, 74%, and with only background classes we are around 60%, right, within 20%. With SVHN we fall further below, and we go to 55%. But in all of these cases, which are performing much better than both the DCGAN and the proxy data, mainly the DCGAN, and definitely the random noise, which does not give us any good performance at all. Right. So that shows us that the utility of this novel, three-player GAN framework on top of the DC GAN, as well as utility of it in terms of doing zero-shot knowledge distillation with proxy dataset. So here are some visualizations. So of CIFAR10 images generated using DGAN with proxy dataset as those CIFAR 190 classes. So I don't know how much these are visible, but as you can see that, I mean, visually we also observe that we generate more, there are some birds in these images and so on and so forth. For example, this one on this also has two legs. This is more like an owl. So where we are doing much better, and when we take a very high confidence samples where the classified probability is greater than 0.9, we again generate, more, visually pleasing images. Also, these are some other images, I mean, which shows a direct comparison between a DCGAN and a DGAN in terms of the visual quality of the images generated. For example, if you look at this dog, you will see that there are some, visually pleasing images like this one. This one looks like a, bulldog, things like that. Whereas these are more generic in nature. These images generated by the DCGANs, right? So in summary, and by the way, so although we have shown results only on knowledge distillation, because this talk is about knowledge distillation, if you go to our paper, you will see that we have also shown some nice experimental results with um, with increment class incremental learning as another application, and we are also exploring many other application areas, because here we are simply generating samples corresponding to a data set, and whatever downstream tasks that can utilize or exploit those samples can be benefited if the samples are statistically more significant. So hence we have explored other areas which I have not described in this particular talk, but please explore those areas as given in our paper. So in summary, we have proposed a data enriching GAN framework to retrieve representative samples from a trained classifier using data from a related domain. We have demonstrated, state-of-the-art performance, at least at the time this was presented in, AAAI 2020. State-of-the-art performance on the task of data-free knowledge distillation on CIFAR 10 and fashion image datasets. And we are the first to show, results on a dataset of larger size. So where the true dataset is larger size, like CIFAR 100, and previously people were only, restraining themselves to generate, samples and show results on CIFAR 10 type of datasets, purely because the computational complexity associated with generating so the samples and so on. And this demonstrates the scalability of our data generation approach. And we have shown that the proposed DGAN could also enrich data even from some sort of a distantly related or somewhat unrelated domains as well in the one of the last slides, to make it more useful for future learning tasks for a given network. So with that, I would like to conclude my talk. So I would, take questions if you have it.
Hello. Yeah. So I have been like watching out for questions. So would you like me to read it out like in order or? Uh,
Yes, sure.
sure.
Actually,
So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, sure. That's we can actually go back and forth in the slides as well. Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. So the first question was from Diksha. She's asking
Mhm.
how is training student network is different from the transfer learning technique, and how is it advantageous
Mhm.
over the transfer learning technique?
Right. Okay. So I'll go back to the very first slides of my illustration. So in transfer learning, for example, you have so that the loss that you still have is the cross entropy, right? So all you do is that you change the first of all, you have to remember that in knowledge distillation, my output space is identical between my teacher and student, right? So it's not that I am my teacher is trying to predict 100 classes, my student is trying to predict 10 classes, right? It's not like that. So the other thing is that that in transfer learning, for example, you kind of again use some sort of where you have the labels, and with that you try to modify some of the final layers of your network, and try to fit it to the data set or the target data set that is at your disposal. Now, this target data set can be a different data set of a very different nature, it can be a similar data set. But in any case, you are trying to utilize the core features or the shallower features in your network, and you're just trying to modify the the final layers and so on. But what the main difference is that still the loss is cross entropy, right? So if you are bound to train a shallower network, for example, you will still encounter that problem of the loss in performance due to reduced model capacity, and that's exactly where the knowledge distillation comes in handy, because now it can transfer into the soft with the help of the soft targets. It can transfer knowledge, as I explained, from a larger pre-trained network, in addition to the cross entropy loss that you would otherwise use in this particular case, to give it to make it more generalizable, or to transfer the generalizability that is present in the teacher, and thereby improving the student model that would otherwise the performance that you would otherwise get by using simply the cross entropy law, right? So that is in addition to that. So even in transfer learning, if you have a trained model which is trained on the target data set, which is a much larger model or at least better performance, you can also use that. So it's not that, but you have to note that this model has to be trained on the target data set, right, as well, that particular teacher model. So clearly, as you can understand, there is an additional loss in play here, which tries to match the soft targets between teacher and the student. The good thing is that you can get better performance out of a relatively shallow network here, in comparison to the other works, and that's one of the main utility of doing knowledge distillation. Does it answer my
Yeah.
question? I think if there is no way to know if it
Yeah, if you can just post in the chat. Yeah, she said thank you,
yeah,
so
sure,
probably that answered the
yeah,
question.
sure.
The next question was from Uttam. How might zero shot distillation and DGAN behave on multi-class spatio-temporal problem? Any comments?
I am not fully certain about the question, but I mean, first of all, I mean, multi-class problems. I mean, we deal with multi-class problems here, multi-class classification problems. But I mean, maybe if you can explain more, what
Yeah,
exactly do you mean by multi-class spatio-temporal problems?
Uttam, you can actually unmute yourself and ask the question yourself,
Yes,
or
sure.
you can
Please,
just post
please.
those things in the chat window,
Hmm.
whichever way you like it. So please unmute yourself and ask the question. Probably that question needs some clarification.
Maybe give an example that might help
Yeah.
me answer.
Are you there? Yeah, while we get back to him, we have the next question from Dr. Ashwin. Is
Yes.
there any method or measure to check how good a proxy database is? If we don't have a proxy database, or if the proxy database contain very limited uh, in brackets labeled only for few class labels related to our problem, is it advisable to use DGAN?
Okay, so that's a good question. So there are two parts to this question. So I think the first part is how kind of measure the goodness of a proxy dataset with respect to the original dataset. Now, I mean, in absence of an original dataset, there is no direct way of doing that, right? So, I mean, one possibility. I mean, if there exists. I mean, if we had access to the at least some of the samples of the original dataset, we could have compared compared them at the feature level, the statistical distribution of their features, and maybe come out with some sort of a measure. However, in absence of the original data set, when we only have access to the classifier, you can also think about other implicit or indirect measures, right? So you can say that, okay, fine, I can take my proxy data set, I will pass it through my pre-trained classifier, just forward pass, right? And I will try to see the entropy that I generate, right? I mean, while I can guarantee you that does not, if even if the entropy of the generated softmaxes are small, that means that my samples are being very highly confident. I mean, being confidently being classified by the classifier as one of coming the classes. That does not necessarily mean that they are very similar in the visual sense or in the semantic sense, but at least we can say that for this particular task at hand, you know, they would nicely to act as surrogate to my original training samples. Right. So that is exactly what I can answer in absence of an original training data set. Right. So there could be other measures as well, but one measure definitely could be obtained by utilizing the proxy data set and the pre-trained classifier together as a separate, separate pre-processing or, pre-training step, and kind of get to there. And that could, in fact, give you an indication of what could be, this particular weight lambda e as well. So you just pass, through the pre-trained classifier and see what is the predicted softmax values, and make design a metric based on top of that, maybe entropy and things like that, right? And there was another question. Can you remind me, Anand? Sorry.
Yeah. Uttam has just posted. I guess he sent it to me privately, but he has posted an example of the
Okay, so can
spatiotemporal.
we take that just one more question as this particular question? Maybe we can finish as we are here.
Uh,
So can you repeat the question, please, once more?
yeah. Okay. Dr. Ashwin's question, that was, is there any method or measure to check how good the proxy database is? And if we don't have a proxy database, or if the proxy database
Yes.
contain very limited, in brackets, like labeled only for a few class labels to our problem, is it advisable to use DGAN?
Yes, so that is exactly what we do in DGAN. So when you have, first of all, we do not, as you can see, anywhere in this particular work, we do not use the labels of the proxy dataset, right? So we do not consider the proxy dataset to be a labeled dataset, because those labels are completely irrelevant with respect to this the my target or the original dataset, right? So the labels are not important, first of all. And as I mean, if you are talking about the fact that we only have some examples of, I mean, examples from some of these classes of the, or some of these classes are somewhat related to the original data set and the rest of the classes are not, that essentially falls in the domain of some sort of a class imbalance situation, and that's exactly where the DGAN come into picture. This take the statistical properties from the proxy dataset to enforce it on the synthesized images, but that classifier is also there, that also affects the generator training, and that says that okay, I can only take those samples that are that are flagged by my classifier as a very highly confident sample, right? So it's not only the proxy data set just comes to provide some sort of a statistic, and that helps really well when their data sets are very relevant to each other. But we have also shown in the experiments as well, as you have seen, that in case of slightly unrelated data sets and imbalanced cases such as this, where some very minor overlap is there, DGAN is actually helping to get better performance than many other state of the art models, right? Yeah, so we can,
Yep.
does it answer? So we can, if that answers, we can move on to
Yeah,
the.
kindly confirm if that answers the question. Uh, okay, we'll go back to the previous question.
Yes, yes.
So Uttam has this question: how might zero-shot distillation and DGAN behave on multi-class spatio-temporal problem? Any
Correct,
comments? So
correct.
he has given an example that example of spatio-temporal data is, for example, a time series satellite image with different non-overlapping classes, uh, could be like building and water, etc.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, so when we talk about, I mean, so this question was about DGAN or ZSKD. Can you read once more? I forgot.
Okay, so he is asking zero-shot distillation and DGAN behave on
Okay, okay,
multi-class
both of
spatial.
them. I see, I
Yeah,
see,
both
I
of
see.
them.
So as you can see, ZSKD is purely for images, because I mean both of these methods are generating images and all, but I can clearly see how they can be extended to other modalities as well. Now you have to only consider the fact that you may want to have an encoder, right? So given I mean I can talk about from the DGAN's perspective, let's say. So given this there exists a classifier that takes a feature from the temporal data. So let's say given you have a spatiotemporal data time series of some kind and so on, and maybe you project that into a vector space, right, or a feature space, right. So if you can work on that encoded space or the feature space, then I don't see any reason why such methods would not be useful, because in both these cases then we'll be only concerned about that feature, and instead of synthesizing images I will synthesize features, right. So my generator will be designed to map to the output of the encoder that I originally had, right. So and the classifier will take those features as input and predict the output, I mean, which still has to be a multi-class classification problem. I mean, that's what is the constraint in across all these two works, right. So yes, in principle you can do that, but you may have to work around, because because there is no image here, right. In your case, so it's not a two-dimensional input data. So hence you may want to operate in a encoded space where that encoder could be frozen or something like that, right. Could be a pre-trained encoder. So does it answer? And in fact, we are also looking into some of these
Can you confirm?
applications.
Yep.
Yeah, where we are operating on the output of of a feature encoder than the input space, which is more difficult, which is a larger dimensional space than the projected encoded space.
Sure. Uttam, kindly confirm if that answers your. Yeah, okay. Sure. He said it's clear.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
we
Thanks.
can move to the next question. So next question is from Anay. He's asking how is using some ground truth data showing lower performance with respect to using data impressions with no knowledge of the target data set during knowledge distillation.
I see. So I think what he's referring to is
Okay.
this here. So this is
Sure.
this especially this particular row, Kimura et al., where we are showing this. So one thing to note is that the dimension of the data, I mean the size of the data set that so they're only using 200 samples, let's say. So that is one of the bottleneck factors, because that's the setting under which they operate, because it's a few shot setup, right? This Kimura et al. 2018 work. Now one can say that you can take those 200 original data, do all sorts of data augmentations and so on, may improve the performance to some extent. I completely agree. But whereas on the other hand, we are free to generate as many data samples as possible up to the original size of the training data, right? Which happened to be the 60K, right? So while using only 24,000 itself, we are achieving this particular performance. Let's say on MNIST. So so it's just a setup that we are. I mean, because I think it's mostly because of the size of the original data that they are restricted to use in their originals in their setup. But the takeaway from this particular table would be that we do not use any additional data, but we can generate a large number of data impressions, right, from our training model, from our trained teacher model, right. We should not go definitely with the original size of the data set, but within that generate as many number of data impressions as possible. Obviously, the restriction comes from the computational cost, but that is a different question altogether, which is not there in ZSKD, there in the DGAN approach again. So that is, I think, the main difference between these two methods, right? So if these guys had used all the original training data, definitely they would have gotten a very high.
Yeah.
Does it answer?
Uh, yeah, he says thank you. So I guess that answered the question. Do we have any more questions? Kindly post them in the chat window. Otherwise, that was the last question. So I have a couple of questions for you,
Sure,
which are
sure.
more like just not technical, like they are more like um, what you can say, like some quick answer kind of things. Which whatever comes to your mind, which is on the top of your mind, you can just
Sure,
say it.
sure,
Right?
sure. You
So
sure.
this is more like how did you get interested in computer science and AI?
So that happened in my final year undergraduate project, because I was an
Mhm.
electrical engineering student and I used to study in a I was from Jadavpur University in Calcutta, so our curriculum was more focused on core electrical. So but in my final year, I got a chance to work on a problem that tries to classify circuits into the different types. It's essentially converter circuits based on their input output, and that's where I got interested about this whole, and I had to actually code up an SVM from scratch. So that's exactly where I think I got interested about this whole area, and possibly I got interesting results that maybe if I did not get any result, I would have not continued. Maybe I would have gone to control systems. So yeah, so since then, from that point onwards, I actually tried looking for, I was interested in, machine learning applications or the labs that are working. So when I was looking for my MS and PhD labs, essentially I was looking at labs that are working in either, NLP, vision, or any other, statistical learning work. Right. So I ended up with computer vision, but there was no real zeal to go to computer vision apart from the fact that I
Hmm.
had image processing as one of my elective courses. So,
Okay.
but I was mostly interested about the analytics part in my final year
Okay.
project. So that I guess is the kind of the motivating factor. And then I think everything fell in line from that point on.
Okay. I think that was the start of a life-changing series of events, probably.
Yeah, could be. I see it that way. Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Okay. I hope you watch movies.
Uh,
Okay. Which is your favorite AI or technology-based movie that is on the top of your mind?
uh, well. Uh,
I
that's
know
a
it's
very interesting
confusing, but
question. I don't. So there was one movie by Leonardo DiCaprio. It's possibly not AI or technology based movie.
hmm
What was its name? Inception or so.
Inception. Yeah.
Yes, Inception. So
Okay.
I guess that was one of my most favorite movies. I mean, if I try to within that domain, but I do not really watch a lot of movies possibly from that domain.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Probably.
yeah.
That is a great movie if
That
someone who
might
is
be a
listening to
future. You can
this.
call that
Yeah.
a future, not AI or anything, but maybe a futuristic movie. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, true. So if anyone who's listening to this haven't watched that movie yet, kindly go and watch it. It might take a couple of views to understand it completely, but it's a great movie. So some memory or some incident that left you bewildered, like when you were working on some project and you were like totally confused and you didn't know what to do, kind of thing, which later kind of like sorted out. Is there a moment or an incident like that you would like to
Hello.
share? Hello? Oh, did I lose you
Yeah,
in
I
between?
did miss
Okay.
because I turned on my video. Can you repeat the
Okay.
last
Yeah. Sure.
question again?
Yeah. Sure. Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
So I was asking if there is a memory or some incident that you remember that might have left you bewildered when you were working on some project. Like you were stuck somewhere and then
Okay.
later it might have cleared, but something that was of
Yes.
interest, like you were confused and you were stuck, or something like that. Yep.
I was stuck and I kind of uh, cleared. I mean, so that happens, I guess, with every project that I worked on. So I
Okay.
got stuck, in all the projects somewhere. I mean, more or less, So, certain projects, leave, long-term impressions on your life or on your mind or how you proceed afterwards. So, I had one good, very. I mean, during my and these all happened during PhDs. I think because that's where we kind of, we are mostly vulnerable to panic attacks and all. So we need to graduate
Yeah.
and all. So I think problem that I worked on, I mean, it's essentially one of my rather more fuller papers, I would say. So it's called network consistent re-identification or network consistent data association. So that came out as the last year of my PhD, and I was not really in this area at all, and this was one problem that kind of had more mathematics than vision. So uh, so that's where I think, I mean I had to kind of I was stuck for a long time, and I used to meet my advisor in coffee shops, and he would, that's where we would meet most of the times because he was so busy. So, and I think, we kind of realized that this might be, a goal. So maybe we'll not be able to, do anything along this line. We were stuck. Really, I'm not going into
Okay.
details of that. But then suddenly, I think, this happens. So, I mean, you come up, you realize like your mistakes and all, and from that point onwards, it's only, a month's time when we submit our paper, and it gets accepted and so on. So and subsequent papers also come. So I think, I mean, it happens with all the researchers, and it's just that work was, more left a long lasting impression on me, and as far as I remember, on my advisor as well. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so another one is like any suggestions to people who would want to like start a career in probably research or industry in AI and ML.
Huh. Okay. So my suggestion would be to, it's very easy nowadays, not easy, but it's very convenient nowadays. That might be the right word to, to get started, and start, to be satisfied, so because, in most cases, people from very different backgrounds can come and, work in this, good in coding. They can, code up a Python script from scratch very easily. There are lots of libraries. So what I would suggest is that, still the mathematics and statistics remains the core subjects in this area. And I mean, this is my observation. I'm not talking about anybody, because there are many good candidates, good students, but many people are only considering, whether they can, do good in a Kaggle competition is equivalent to, being a data scientist or maybe something like that. So you have to always remember that there is a huge body of literature in the area of statistical learning, and there are fantastic books written, and I would urge everybody to, at least to have, good working knowledge in probability, statistics, estimation theory, bit of statistical learning, and that's my first suggestion. And because if your fundamentals are, and that might not be related to deep learning or anything at all. I mean, this could be purely, Bayesian estimation or things like that. But as long as your fundamentals are cleared, you can venture into any area, and you can contribute better. And instead of, making incremental contributions, you can actually contribute, theoretically, and often, that can lead to uh, better publications. You can get more citations as well in that way. So that's why my suggestion is that, I mean, anybody who is interested in the true, to gain, satisfaction out of research in this area, and that could be in industry or academia, irrespective of that, it's the same. You need to, invest a little more time to, solidifying the basics beyond, the Andrew Ng course, I would say. Okay,
Okay,
read some books,
correct,
and spend a little more time to brush up your, statistics, estimation theory, linear algebra skills, and so on and so forth.
correct. I totally
Casey
agree.
Tulsiani and Friedman, Elements of Statistical Learning, is a fantastic book. There are many other books. That is a
Mhm.
good book. I think people should make a bedside, to me.
Sure. Okay, sure. Okay, so next one will be like quite funny. When do you think the AI beings will take over the world?
I am a strong believer in human ability, so natural intelligence.
Okay, okay,
So I would not want the AI beings to take over the world, and hence I am biased. So
okay.
I feel that, I think, I mean, the majority of the, benefit that we'll see in the coming years is where, the machine learning tools are used, or the I mean, artificial intelligence is still a long shot. So,
Mhm.
when we can truly harness, power in aiding some of our own capabilities, so that's where we can possibly, get the make maximum benefit out of this whole, if you call it a revolution, for the past
Sure.
10 years.
Okay.
So the benefit of the revolution could be actually harnessed when we kind of develop systems that kind of go hand in hand, and which act as enablers of even development of human intelligence, or complement human intelligence in some sense. So
Mhm.
so you can call. I mean, an example is possibly, if there is anybody. If you talked about tech movies, so maybe Robocop
Right.
example.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
yeah, I mean, my point is, as long as it enables us, and also it enables us to gain insight into some of these
Mhm.
things, instead of simply developing tools to solve tasks that are rather trivial. I mean, it's just
Mhm.
on we are harnessing data, right?
Sure.
So beyond that, I mean, once things start on, and when we start getting true intelligent
Mhm.
agents, that is
Yeah.
maybe the time when we can call that maybe we are reaching somewhere.
Okay. Sure. That's all the questions I had. I hope you enjoyed that portion.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure. That's very interesting, very new to me.
yeah, we do
Yeah.
that as a surprise. So, any closing notes for the session?
No, I mean, I again want to thank all of you to invite me. I gave one more presentation long back, I think, in one of the computer society,
Yes. Even I was there.
presentations. Yes, I remember I
That was
talked
our
about something
flagship,
completely
yeah,
different. Yeah.
flagship event. That's
So
true.
yeah, so I like coming back to the CS, and I'm part of the Signal Processing Society in Bangalore. So
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I like to get involved with you guys as well. So yeah, I mean, I really hope and wish the CS Society to organize more such events in future, and possibly events which I may not be aware of, which involves students and all as well. And yeah, and please give us travel grants and all as well. Yeah. So with that,
uh,
yeah, thank you again, essentially,
uh,
for changing my dates repeatedly from last weekend. So thanks, Vishwas.
thanks a lot,
No,
Dr. Anirban. Which was any closing notes from your side?
yeah, yeah. So Anirban, thank you. Thanks a lot. And thanks for your continued support. I know you were also part of the 2018 flagship event. And
Yes.
yeah, I think audience and participants had a lot to take home about today, especially in the knowledge networks and DGAN. And like to thank you again on behalf of the Exicom committee of our chapter. And we look forward to hosting you again.
Thank you. I look forward to speaking in another event whenever comes. Thank you
Sure.
so much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Anirban, and thanks a lot, Dr. Vishwas, for joining us on this call.
Hey, thanks, Anand, as well.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, let's officially wind up the session.